Hello, welcome back. It's Mickey D here again. This one's going to be a little bit more off the cuff, a little bit less scripted. Still recovering from my PQ weekend. And as you can see on screen, I didn't win the thing, but I made the finals, and that was luckily for me good enough. My opponent had already won their invite to the World Championship, so by making the finals, the day one bye until Worlds got passed down to me, and so now I'm kind of locked into going to Worlds this year. So this is going to be a video shouting out everyone that was there, everyone that I met, everyone I interacted with, as well as like the amazing people who made the thing run, and just like recapping my experience at the tournament, my matchups, how I went, what my deck list was, what I would change about it, stuff like that. So right off rip, shout out to Atlas Games and Cole, the owner at Atlas Games. They ran a really tight ship. Shout out to Byron, our head judge, Sebastian, another one of our judges. I'm sorry I missed the name of the third judge there. They are from out of state. They were from Illinois, but shout out to them. Shout out to Leaning to Our Pizza, the pizza place next door. That place is amazing. Shout out to Adam for printing my deck list. I told you I'd slip this in. Keep printing my deck list, please. But no, a good friend of mine, and we test pretty often. And then shout out to my testing team, the Bothan Network. A lot of people in the public Discord there will help you with your deck if you have any questions on it, if you're looking for games. And then the testing team members, they all really helped me grind this deck out and make sure I was super prepared for any of the big matchups. And you'll see throughout the day, I played only a few leaders, and they were pretty popular coming into the thing for the most part. So yeah, shout out to them. And then shout out as well to fellow Masterclass teachers, I guess, Loopee and KTOD Matty, Late Night Gaming Loopee and KTOD Matty. If you haven't checked out that masterclass, I think it's a great repository of information, a great meeting of minds on different opinions on the deck I brought, which is Quinlan Tarkentown, which I've been talking about for a bit now. And so I would highly recommend that video as like an accompaniment to this video, or just if you're looking to get into Quinlan Tarkentown at all. And yeah. So let's get started. So this is the list I brought. If you've seen my last video, it's pretty similar. I think the main deck switch, I did go to L3 over R2D2. I think that's the main switch. There's some trimming here and there. Sideboard is a bit different. Shout out to Woo as well. He really helped me with some sideboard ideas and ideas of like cards I could have in there and what matchups to bring them in for. I know he's been working pretty hard on this deck as well. And so, yeah. There are a couple things I would maybe not change right away, but I'd want to test. I'll get into it a bit later, but I think I had one too many waylays in the sideboard, maybe one too many waylays in the main deck instead. I'm starting to think about maybe trimming on Grogu's. Maybe bringing R2D2 back into the list, but any changes I make would be very minor. I think like 45 of the 50 core cards are set. Could I tell you which 45? Probably. I'm not going to do it off the top of my head for sure, but there's definitely like a core 45 there. And yeah, deck went really well, performed really well this weekend, obviously, for me. So a couple of pictures from the event. The top 8 photo up on your left, and then an image from us playing in the finals there. And you can see my opponent Joey, shout out to him. Get to Joey in a second. Already has the championship map from set 2, so he got it again this time, but I did get the Worlds invite, and so that's kind of what we played, what I entered the tournament for, mostly in the first place. So let's go over my matchups. I tried to get everyone's names correctly. I'm awful with names. My memory is terrible, so please forgive me, my opponents that I didn't know as well, if I got your name wrong. So, round 1, I played against Django Tarkentown, but this list is from a newer player who's still getting into the game, doesn't have all the cards, and is kind of experimenting with his own build of the list. So shout out to Doug. In fact, I remember like a couple of weeks prior to the event, I was helping him play his first games of SWU, and he's really sharpened up in 2 weeks. He's a really sharp player, so can't wait to see more of him. I hope he does well. Lost one game there to a surprise strike for Exact Lethal while I was behind in action. But overall, some pretty tight races. Plo did some work. Grogu did some work. I mean, Django Tarkentown's kind of the main reason Grogu's in the main deck. So, as you can see with all the Django I played, not all at Tarkentown, but with all the Django I played against, I was pretty happy to have that little groggly boy in my main deck. Round 2 was against Kira Green, Titus. He's a young up-and-comer. He's a super sharp kid playing the game. He's going to be really, really good at this game one day because he's already really, really good at this game. He's going to get even better and scarier. That matchup, I kind of shredded his hand. I kept him off of ramp for most of both games, and then I had timely discards when he had a lot of big stuff in hand, so I was able to take the thing he was planning to play that turn and kind of strand his turn across both games. And I remember I pillaged him game 2, and like we had played in the week previously at a locals, and we were playing that same matchup, and I remember like there was one game I double forced through and double pillaged him or something close to that, and I just felt absolutely awful, and I got to do some of that again. So if you get to do that in the matchup, then you're doing pretty well. Round 3 against Brad. So Brad is the other player locally who I think is like the best player in our area, and he has been a Blue-Green Villain fan since the game came out. And this was a really tight matchup. I think I played a little sloppily. Brad played really tightly, and like he deserved the win. I snuck a game when he ramped into Traitorous on my Cassian, and I had the Disabling Fangfighter for the Traitorous. Just kind of blew the game wide open from there. And like I think I had some timely discards and a good Plo Koon and a Cassian from the resource row to push damage, and just like I had all the answers up the curve. So my deck was bailing me out that game, and then Brad kind of punched me back down to earth in game 3. Game 1, he just ramped, and like Kira cleared the board, and I think double Traitorous to me. That might have been in the quarterfinals. As you'll see, I played Brad again. I think that was in the quarterfinals actually, but like Traitorous is a really good card against Quinlan Tarkentown, especially early, and so that was tough to fight through. And in game 3, he sniped my Quinlan deploy with an overwhelming barrage on a devastating gunship, and I remember saying out loud to him, I don't think there's a card for 6 resources you can play that gets my Quinlan in one action. And I was right. It cost 5 resources, so a little bit of a blank spot there. He got me in the Swiss, and yeah, Brad's a very good player, so no shame in losing that. Then we had lunch after round 3. Let me refresh, because I remember I was also like I believe that round was streamed, and I'm not normally nervous on camera. As you can see, I make YouTube videos. I'd hope I don't get too nervous on camera, but for some reason, I think it was just hadn't eaten in a while, was getting a little bit not sleepy, but like, hangry, if you will, a little bit low on energy. First round on camera, it's a PQ playing against a great player to go to 3-0. And so it was just like a meeting of all these factors that made me a little bit more nervous than I'm used to when playing on camera in particular. So came back to sit down after lunch in round 4 and saw Django Tarkentown across from me, with Jacob playing Django Tarkentown. And I was not necessarily looking forward to that, because Django Tarkentown is a super stressful matchup. Jacob was a really cool guy, though. He made it really easy, and like I got like a perfect hand in game 2, especially when I mulliganed. My opening hand was Grogu, Force Throw, Baby Falcon, Spark of Rebellion, and that's like the exact 4 cards I want in that matchup. And so it was hard to lose from that point, and shout out to him. He was super cool. We talked for pretty much the full round after. And then going up to round 5, another great game. I am apologize because I'm looking at my phone because that's what it was. Steve here owns First Turn Games, I believe it is, in Cedar Rapids. I believe it's the biggest store for Magic in Cedar Rapids out in eastern Iowa. So shout out to Steve. Shout out to First Turn Games. You should check them out if you're in the area. If I'm wrong about that and you somehow come across this video, please correct me. But yeah, super cool match. Towards the end of game 1, I believe Steve was like looking at the board, looking at his hand, and looked at me and was like, damn, this is a really good game. And I fully agreed. We had a great 2-game set. Like just throwing haymakers back and forth. Like game 1, I think he missed his turn 1 play, unfortunately, but that meant he had a bunch of bombs in hand, and so I had to like fight through and stay just ahead enough in the late game to push through the final points of damage. And then Adam in round 6, who also made the top 8 with me. We had 2 close games as well. I believe I was behind by 1 action both games. He needed a pump and he had a pump, and so some very interesting games against some great players. It was just a lot of fun. And then I lost my last round, so 4-2. I thought I was out, but I was looking at the standings and saw 2 X2s would squeak into the top 8 cut. And lo and behold, once the top 8 cut was shown and like standings were finalized, I was the 8th seed going into the top 8 of the PQ. So 3 PQs I've been to. One of them I went 2-2, scrub out, that happens. And then the second and third one, I end up the 8th seed after Swiss, just barely squeaking in. To be fair, the first PQ I was 6-1. I was just like the lowest on tiebreakers there. But yep, 4-2 going into top 8, and Brad was our undefeated in the Swiss, so I had to play against him again. This was another match I believe was streamed, and some really, really good games. Like I think I sharpened up a lot from our first round that we played. Timely discard to nail ramp. I remember in game 3, Kira was holding back 2 Vaders in his hand, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, but Kira has been an all-star for me, not just for that tournament, but like all set. Kira has been an absolute all-star for me. Game 1, I believe, was the 2 traitorous game. Game 2, I took him pretty late. I saved my Tarkin Town for Snoke when it came out. Like I remember I had a tech, so I smuggled that out and played it like a Falcon from Smuggle. And then going into the next turn, he slammed a Snoke, and then I smuggled in a Plo Koon, no ambush, smuggled out a Force Throw, targeted him. He discarded a 3 cost or higher, and then I Tarkin Towned his Snoke and was able to push for a bunch of damage, and the game was over from that point. Game 3 was way more of like a tempo race game. I think I had to fight through 1 traitorous in this game, but I believe I got to keep him off of ramp, and then Kira was doing a lot of work. Spark of Rebellion did some work as well, because Kira was holding back the top end, and then I could spark the answers for the Kira, or anything that was kind of getting in my way to go base. And then I started focusing on base a little earlier, because I had to use Target Town early, I believe, on a Pershing, because you want to keep them off cards, since you want to discard is a big part of your game plan against them. And so with that being the case, I realized, like, I don't know if I have a way to fight through a Snoke, at least not like if it sticks for a couple turns. Maybe if he slams it, I can get just enough damage with like a surprise strike on the turn it lands, but there's no way I can fight through it. And so turned on the gas, got lucky that I named Vader with Akira. And I remember there was a point where like I played a Kira naming something else, and then I weakened my Kira to incentivize him to trade into it, because with the first Kira I had seen Darth Vader, and so I knew I wanted to answer that. And so I got him into trade into my first Kira, knowing that I had a second one in my hand to play and name Vader, and he had happened to draw a second one at that point in the game, and so I got lucky with the 2-for-1 there. But yeah, those were really tight games. Those were really fun. Probably all the games in the top cut minus except maybe the finals, and this is no fault of Joey's at all, it's all on me, were some of the best games I played in Star Wars Unlimited, if not at least for the day. Speaking of which, Jeffrey, I played in the semifinals. He was on Sabine ECL. 3 insanely tight games that all came down to one action, I believe, or like a turn. Game 3 in particular, like the board got traded into his deploy turn to the point where it was like my Millennium Falcon versus his Sabine leader that he then Darksabered up, and I realized I don't have an answer for this, so I can either try and hope and draw the answer or try and initiate a race. And I somehow survived 3 Darksaber hits. I had Waylay to answer his next turn play to make sure it was just Sabine with the Darksaber I had to deal with, and had the surprise strike that I was building towards throughout the entire game once I realized that. And so managed to win that race. He didn't top deck the pump that he needed to get me. I'm pretty sure he had me dead. Like, he had the resources he needed. He could still have ECL up, so ECL Poe to discard a card and deal 2 damage, or ECL a record to like get the overwhelm. But all of that involves also having to attack with Sabine. And I had him dead in 1 action on the way back with a Millennium Falcon Red 3 Surprise Strike combo for 7 damage, I believe. All right, that's the math. I know I got him for exactly lethal. And so super close games. And then Joey Frechette, him and his brother Cody, shout out to you two. See you around all the time at bigger tournaments because they're from Minnesota. Love to play with those guys. They're great. I haven't had a chance to play Cody yet, I don't think. Joey, I've had the chance to play twice, both in PQ Top Cuts, both super close games, both that I've lost. So, funny story, in set 2, the first time I met Joey, I was on Sabine Yellow, and he was on Boba ECL, and there was a point where I keyed him, and I saw like a Maul and something else, and I think the conventional wisdom is to name Maul with the Kira. I named Hotshot Blaster to try and protect all my units, knowing it's in the Smuggle row. I asked him after the game, and he's like, yeah, no, that messed up my whole game plan. Like, you named Hotshot, I was not expecting that. Similar point comes up in this game where I play Kira. I see like a Han Solo unit and something else in hand, and similarly it's like a 7-cost ambusher, but he can't play it this turn. And so I'm thinking, and I end up naming Tech. The 2 cards I was thinking of were Tech and Zori Bliss, because Zori Bliss is kind of what killed me game 1. 4/7, big body, hard to like trade down efficiently. It's going to get a couple hits in. And so I almost named that with the Kira in game 2. And I think I maybe should have. I don't hate my decision, though, because Tech was also super awkward for me to answer. It would take a couple actions, as well as a couple, like 6 damage off of his base. And the main deciding factor I went with was that his list runs 3 Tech and 2 Zori. So from a numbers perspective, he's slightly more likely to have Tech. Unfortunately, he had Zori. I think there was some other stuff I could have done in that matchup too. Like, I played Grogu on turn 1 both games, and I think that's a mistake. Grogu is really good against them because it can tap down the Han deploy, but I think what you want to do is like play a 2/2, like ideally the L3 on turn 1 against Han 1 yellow, which, if I haven't mentioned it, that's what Joey was playing. So that way I could set up Tarkin Tones on his X5s or Surprise Strikes with the shield. And then on turn 3, do a 2/2. So like a Spark plus a Grogu is a really good turn 3, I think. Or just even another body plus a Grogu. I think that's when you want to play it. And then past that, it gets too slow. So I think ideally, I'd like play the Grogu a little bit later. I just kind of messed that up. But good learning. Unfortunately, that happened in the finals of a PQ. But you know, for a future reference for everyone else out there, as well as myself, if I ever take this deck to a big tournament again, that's a matchup that I think we're going to see a lot of. So, great matches all day, great players all day. Everyone was super chill, had a great time. Joey's a deserving champion. He's already won one of these things. And so I hope I get a chance to play him in another PQ Top 8 in the future, or even something bigger. And maybe this time I can get him. So, now that we've looked at the list, went through the matches, let's talk about some changes I've thought of. Mostly for the sideboard, the R2 might sneak back into the main deck. Bamboozle is a card that has been in there before, and given the rise in both like Han and Sabine and Django's just general popularity, that card can be a huge tempo swing against all of those decks, especially with Darksaber, and with a lot of Sabines going towards a more upgrade heavy route, moving away from Wing Leader, getting onto the General's Blade. Obviously, the Bamboozle is good against the Wing Leader as well. It's probably better against Wing Leader than General's Blade, but it's good against both of them. Like, it's such a huge tempo swing, basically gaining 5 life if they upgrade it to a 2-power unit, and burning 3 of their resources, because, like, 3 resources go back to hand. The chances that they're going to get to be able to play that card again and it be impactful are slim to none. The game's usually over by that point, that they could play it again. My issue with it was that I didn't want too much upgrade hate, and I was a little bit more worried about like the control decks and Bosk in particular. And against Bosk, I much prefer disabling Fangfighter. I think Bamboozle is a bit of a trap against Lieutenant Chilton decks, because the way, at least, that the more mid-rangey Quinlan build that goes up to like Han in the main deck wants to play it, I think the way you answer Chilton is just through discard. Because Bamboozle's good against Charleston, but I think it's bad into everything else there. Like, Bamboozle your own guy to bounce their bounties doesn't do anything, in my opinion. Like, it's such a negative tempo swing on your side. Like, they can often just, like, re-up that bounty next turn. And you either have to spend another card to answer it from their hands, or, like, you just have to set up a bigger unit or trade in your unit that's weak. I think it's a trapping against those decks, and I was more worried about the control in my local area. Bit of a bad call on my part. There's a lot of like Django's, and CAD was especially prevalent there, and Sabine was big there, so that's kind of a meta call based on what you think. I might be moving more that way. R2-D2, I might bring it back as like a 1 or 2 of in the main, because Grogu was great, but I found myself leaning towards him a little bit too much. Specifically in that Han matchup, I think he's less good than I initially thought, even though he is still very good. And R2-D2 helps you find the answers you want for Han. Specifically, like, in that matchup, you're almost just, like, exclusively digging for Plo Koon to answer Flip, or, like, to answer Kira's, and to threaten the Flip next turn and make them attack in, and then you have other 3-power units that can trade into their Han after their Han hits your Plo, that kind of stuff. So R2 might be making its way back in the deck. I still think it's a little bit clunky and a little bit awkward in this list, just because you're often, like, not lean on cards necessarily, but, like, you have a fistful of cards that you want as, like, options against specific play lines. So, for example, I'll often keep 2-3 costs in my hand against like a Django. So if they go space with their 3 costs, which they're most likely going to do, I can play my Falcon. But if they like TDR on turn 2 for some reason, or if they play some sort of tempo play, or they're playing to the ground, then I can play my Cassian instead. And that's the kind of play lines. Same thing with like on 3, I might keep both Kira and K2 as options. Maybe that's a play habit I need to change and like get more comfortable with certain lines, but that's why R2 has always felt a little awkward for me. It's like, I want these options. Why would I discard an option to dig for potentially finding a different option when I already had 2 to begin with? But as the meta starts to like condense and become clearer, and you have very specific options you're looking for in very specific matchups, then R2 gets more valuable because it helps you dig for those specific cards. The Senatorial Corvette has something that's been on my mind for a bit. I think it would replace Pillage. Pillage did a decent amount of work for me this weekend. I think I played it like twice into the Kiras, and it was good both times. But the Corvette is a little bit better into like Han, because it's a threat while it also threatens their hand, even though it is a bit slow there. It's also way better into like the hero mid-rangey piles, like the blue-red, the red Rays and the red Anakins, or the blue Anakins and stuff like that. And so that's the tension there of like, I don't want to move away from Pillage necessarily, but the Corvette has more utility. Like, it's good into the Bosks and the Kiras while also being good into like Anakin, Han, maybe Rey, whereas Pillage is great into Bosk and Kira while only okay into the Reys and the Anakins, and being a trap, I think, against stuff like Han. So it's just like a balance of a card that's 100 in one matchup and 0 in another versus a card that's like 60 in two different matchups. And then Wrecker, shout out to Bobby Sapphire of KTOD. You should check their channel out, check out their Patreon. Kind of cooked up a lot of ideas in that thread there as well. He had mentioned Wrecker. Wrecker is just such a powerful card. My hesitation with it is that it can snipe 6 costs for 6, or anything lower for 6 if you have Quinlan deployed. My 2 hesitations with it are the 6s you want to hit either are too big or come out too early, specifically Han Leader. He technically is a 6 cost, but he comes out on 5, so he comes out a turn too early for Wrecker to be able to do that 5+1 to him. And then stuff like Anakin is too big. Stuff like Obi-Wan Leader is too big, if that's a thing that you see. The 6-cost leaders in general are too big, besides Rey on deploy. And Rey is usually going to be protected. It does hit like Obi-Wan units, so that could be good. And it just like cleans stuff up while presenting a big threat. The other problem, which ties into this, is that you either are trying to get to Han unit in certain matchups, which this prevents, or that I think this card is too slow. Like, there's a very narrow range of matchups where this card is fast enough to want, but the matchup is slow enough to get to it. If that makes sense. Because, like, against your Bosks and your Kiras and your hero mid-range matchups, you're going to go 10 plus resources generally, I have found. And so you want your Hans, and you don't want to be defeating your resources because you don't want to get behind. But against like your Sabines and your Djangos and any other, like the Mirror, maybe it's all right in the Mirror because that gets a little bit grindier, but basically Sabine and Django, I think that card is too slow. Like, you're not getting to Wrecker. The game is over before that card matters. And so it's for stuff like the Mirror and Han where this card I think is going to see play. And you'd obviously probably bring it in against the blue hero mid-range decks, and the green villain, like the blue-green villain decks. It's just a little bit awkward in those situations. And it's more like a 7-drop, I would imagine. And so I think it's worth testing. I also see it being very awkward. But those are the main cards I've been thinking about since the tournament. So let's go over some of the all-stars of the weekend. Surprise Strike won me a couple games, specifically against Sabine. I think games 2 and 3 I won with a Surprise Strike, either as final action or to set up and threaten a different attack to be lethal for a final action. Plo Koon is Plo Koon. That card's insane. You can do some cute things into Kira with this card. So, like, there was a game where my Kira opponent, I forget if it was Titus or Brad, I think it was Brad, like, ramped out his Kira, flipped, and then attacked into my Cassian and made a 7-1 Kira while still having a Pershing left over. And then I go to untap with initiative on 5 resources. I slam Plo Koon, use the Quinlan ping to finish off the Kira, because it's often going to be damaging itself, and then ambush into the Pershing to clear the board. So some cute stuff like that. You can clear Han unit. He was hiding from me a little bit in game 1 against Joey, and then game 2 he popped up but took out a Kira unit, I think. So Han was protected. All Han leader was protected from Plo Koon this weekend, but I mean, he just is such a threatening presence on the board too. He's just an insane card. We'll come back to Kira in a sec. Millennium Falcon in the Sabine matchup was actually really big for me. Like, I had theory crafted Falcon on turn 2 or maybe turn 3 with like a Force Throw or a Daring Raid being good into Sabine. I never put it into practice until the semifinals match. It was pretty good into Sabine. So it lets you race pretty effectively. And like, if you're playing one behind curve against Sabine, it's generally okay. Like, the big thing you want is your 4 cost. You want to play your Kira or your K2 on curve. Even though in game 2 of the semifinals I didn't. But if you're playing one behind curve on turn 5, like, you don't get a Plo Koon, but oftentimes Plo Kooning Sabine is too slow. And so, like, you'd rather just race with, like, a Surprise Strike and a 2-drop, or like a red 3 and a Daring Raid, or a red 3 and a Force Throw, or something like that. And so playing one behind curve against Sabine isn't necessarily the end of the world. And if you're trading like that one resource a turn for 9 damage over the course of the game, that really makes an impact. Grogu's hiding behind my face. He came up very specific matchups, the Django Tarkentown in particular. That's what he's there for, and he shined in that matchup. And then Kira, I say Plo Koon is the best card in set 3, but low key it might be Kira, even though she's a set 2 card. I don't know what it is, but Kira has been shining for me this entire set. She just answers so many problems. Triple Dark Raid can delay that for a turn or 2, which can be enough to win the race against Django. You can name an answer for her to blink your Bosk or Kira opponent's turn, which lets you get ahead onto the flip and clear their leader and start pushing damage. It can name Obi-Wan against the blue hero decks when they plan to, like, protect their flip going into the 6 resource turn. It can name village protectors in that same vein, so, like, if they do want to protect their leader, it's their whole turn, and that just lets you get so far ahead in tempo. She's just been insane for me all set long. Kira wins games. I will keep saying this. Every deck I play for the rest, don't hold me to this, but hyperbolically, every deck I play for the rest of set 3 may have 3 Kiras in it. And, like, given some of the stuff I've been tinkering with lately, that's been holding true. Kira has been absolutely nuts for me. So I wouldn't say these cards necessarily underperformed. They were just hiding from me yesterday. And Force Throw is obviously insane. I just had a lot of games where it wasn't lining up properly. So against Django Tarkentown, I think I got to use it in one game, and otherwise I either didn't see it, didn't have a force unit in play, or it was taken from my hand with, like, a Bazine. And for the rest of the games, it was just hiding from me. And, like, I think the only other force through I played all day was from my resource row with Smuggle from Tech. And then Han, he was a little slow for me. And so I either had to resource him super early, or, like, I didn't draw him when I needed him. I think I got to play him once or twice throughout the day. I forget if in one of the Django ECL matchups he answered a Cad Bane or not. I don't believe I got to do that. I think that's less a product of the card being bad in the list and more a product of, like, I played against 4 Djangos and 3 Kiras, and then one Sabine, 1 Han. And so it was more of a product of my matchups than anything. So yeah, I don't think obviously I would not take out Force Throw, and I don't think I would touch Han. Maybe you trim 1 and put it into the sideboard, but Han is just so insane, and just the threat of Han is so good that I think I'd leave him at 3 in the main deck, because it helps so much in a lot of your bad matchups, in green-yellow villainy if they're playing Cad, in blue hero when they have Luke. He's so good against those cards, and those are some of your tougher matchups, so... All right, so I reached out and asked people what they wanted to hear in a video like this, and overwhelmingly, to varying degrees, the response I got was sideboard. How do you sideboard with this deck? And you've probably heard a lot of content creators mention it and a lot of swoop players mention it. I don't have, like, a sideboard guide for you. I don't have a specific way I sideboard against, like, you sideboard these 3 cards in and these 3 cards out against Kira Green every time. It's not like that. It's more based on, like, I don't sideboard in Disabling Fangfighter against Kira Green unless I see my opponent is on Traitorous and, like, or they sided in top target. Then in game 3 I might grab my Disabling Fangfighters again, stuff like that. And so instead I'm going to go through each card and give you the type of matchup I bring it in for, or, like, the type of card I'm looking to answer with that card. And hopefully that helps you identify, like, oh, Daring Raid is for these low to the ground 2 health decks, or these 5 health decks with Tarkentown. Sabine and Han have those kind of cards in their deck. Let me bring in the Daring Raid for that. Speaking of, so Daring Raid, I bring it in against any like super fast deck when I need to get my high costs out. I bring it in against any deck that has 2 health units, so basically Django Tarkentown. But there could be other matchups you see, stuff like that. And then I also bring it in for matchups with a lot of 5 health units. Specifically, the Han1 yellow decks are moving towards a heavy 5 health package of units. Like they're on their Liberated Slaves, they already have their tech and their DJ. Because Tarkentown plus Daring Raid will clear those 5 health units. And so those are the kind of matchups I bring Daring Raid in for. Examples are like Sabine, I just want to lean my deck down, and then Han1 yellow. Disabling Fang Fighter is pretty self-explanatory. If there's scary upgrades in the deck, you want to bring it in. Big targets being Darksaber, any bounties, lightsabers. So matchups you might bring it in for being Sabine, Bosk, Anakin. I hesitate to bring it in against like a Rey unless I see a lightsaber, or maybe they're going to top target post board. Tech is for super grindy matchups. Obvious ones being like Kira Green and a Bosk Blue, where the games are going super long. But other matchups I bring it in for are like matchups where your hand is getting shredded. So that being like the Mirror in Han1 Yellow. It lets you play from the resource route and kind of stay on parity with Han1 Yellow because they naturally have 3 techs. And it lets you like get more aggressive with your resourcing decisions to stay ahead early because you know in the late game you're going to have what you need with your tech. Waylay is this kind of spot card. I think I'm going to trim it to 1 in the sideboard. That was the first thing I thought because throughout the day on Saturday for my PQ, it was the card, like I only ever brought 1 of it in, I think, except for maybe against Sabine. And so with that being the case, I think I can find another card like a Bamboozle that's good into Sabine and has more utility elsewhere that I can trim a Waylay. But it's a card that I side in a lot whenever I have stuff I need to take out. For example, into Sabine, it's not like the best card, but especially if they're moving to more General's Blade stuff, it also enters Wing Leader, so it's good into that kind of play. And you just have a lot you need to get out. Like you want to get out of Han, usually you want to get out of Big Falcon. You don't necessarily want Grogu in that matchup, I have found, because you want to race. I usually leave like a couple of him in. Same with Spark, you don't necessarily want all of those, and so you start to trim in places, and then you have Daring Raid you want to bring in, Disabling Fang Fighter, maybe a K2, and then it's like, well, I have at least 5 cards I want to take out, so let's throw in a Waylay. Same thing with like Bosk, where you have a lot of tools for Bosk, so it doesn't happen as often, but like you have Grogu's you want to take out against Bosk, and Daring Raids, and Red 3s I don't like in that matchup, and you start to take all these cards out, and if you need an extra card in, Waylay is a great catch-all card, kind of a panic button. The only matchup I bring it in specifically for is Cad Tarkentown, or more broadly, any deck with now there are 2 of them, because it's not like an incredible answer, because they still get the card back that they invested, but you trade basically your Waylay for now there are 2 of them, you stay even on parity. So those are the matchups I specifically want Waylay for. Otherwise, it's kind of a catch-all. K2 is a little bit of a catch-all as well because it can help in both the fast matchups where you want to go more aggressive, as well as the slower matchups where you like want to grind out. Basically, it's like, do you want the 3 damage? Do you want the discard? If the answer is yes to either of those, K2 is not bad. Obviously, there's 2 of him in the main deck, so he's a great card in the deck. The only matchup I was wary of him in was against Han1 Yellow, because Cunning can get bounced by, or K2 can get bounced by Cunning, and that's pretty backbreaking. If they invest 4 resources into your 4 resources, plus they get an extra bonus. However, with Han1 Cunning decks moving more towards Zori, K2 plus Surprise Strike is probably your cleanest answer besides Plo Koon plus Ping. And if you're investing Plo Koon plus Ping into Zori, it means you don't have it for the Han deploy. So K2, that's another thing I'm gonna test to be wary of. But anything like I don't bring it in against Django Tarkentown because I'm not trading on the ground really. But it's a card that also comes in a lot. Like I bring it in against Sabine because I need to get leaner, and then I bring it in against these super grindy decks. And then Pillage is probably the most hyper specific card in the deck, like in the sideboard. It's anything Curia Green or slower is what I bring this in for. It's for those super grindy matchups where you want to disrupt their hand, and by disrupting their hand, make their resourcing awkward. That's, I think, the power behind Pillage and discard, like mass discard, is that once you get them super low on cards or down to no cards and they only have 6 resources, they're drawing 2 a turn. But if they draw like an 8 cost and a 4 cost and they're only on 6 resources, they have to choose whether they're skipping this turn to hold on to their 8 cost, which gives you like a huge tempo advantage, or if they're resourcing one of their big bombs, which they're now down one of those, and they only have a select few in the deck, to be able to stay like at parity on tempo throughout the game. So that's the power of discard. Those are the matchups I bring that in for. Hopefully that sideboard guide helps some. Yeah, that's all I got for you. Thank you for watching. I hope to see people at another PQ. I'm planning on going to St. Paul in a month, and I'm hoping to make it out to the Forge potentially in Chaska at in a week and a half. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.